Good morning. I love our church. I love that we can be real. That's part of who we are. God, we just need to be real because that's the way God does things, right? He doesn't work with the people that we act like we are. He works with the people we really are. And the more we're ready to let him do that, the more open we are to that, and just being real with God, the more he can get at what he's up to. But anyway, Scotty's gone. And this is not part of a series. Now, this will kind of, I think, fit the series that we've just gone through really, really well. But Scotty was gone. Here's a free Sunday. I got to do whatever I wanted to do, so I thought I'd go crazy. And what we're going to look at is lessons about discipleship from a Cowboys rope. How about that? Does that sound like fun? I got one with me. Thank you very much, Adrian. Adrian brought this rope. We're going to be talking about ropes in just a bit. Before we get started there, let me read a passage from 2 Timothy. I got it up here. Now, in a great house, there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honorable use and some for dishonorable use. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he'll be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master of the house, ready for every good work. Now, granted, this doesn't talk about ropes, okay? I get that. But it talks about being a vessel for honorable use. It talks about being useful to the master of the house. Isn't that what? If you love Jesus, you want to be useful to him. It's what discipleship is all about. Discipleship is saying, I see in Jesus one who is worthy of me committing my life to. I want to follow him, and I want to serve him, and I want to become like him. I want his life to be so in my life that I can learn to live Jesus. That's what discipleship is really all about. And so I want to think about this being a vessel in the master's hand, but instead of using a vessel from 2 Timothy, I want to use a rope, a cowboy's rope. Now, cowboys have lots of tools. You may think one of the most important tools is a firearm, but in reality, cowboys rarely ever use their firearm. I suppose a good knife would be important for any number of uses. You can ask the steers, I suppose, for what some of those uses might be. Let me move on. But probably the most important tool that a cowboy has, part of his equipment. You got that harsh thing that's very important. But I'm talking about a tool in his hand would be a cowboy's rope. 1998, I moved to Pleasanton, Texas, to become the pastor of First Baptist Church there. The church was started in 1866. Yeah, which happened to be the same year that they gathered cattle from all over South Texas to that place, Pleasanton, to begin what became those great cattle drives of the 1800s of the 19th century. So Pleasanton talks about itself as being the birthplace of the cowboy. Now, I suppose that's debatable, but if you go back and study the history, I think they make a pretty good case for that. It was where the vaqueros of the Spanish missions worked cattle south of San Antonio. Vaqueros, probably the word from which we get our word buckaroo. The vaqueros were the very first cowboys. And then when all the cowboys got together to gather the herds there, the beginning of the Chisholm Trail, some people talk about it starting in San Antonio, but it's really south of there in Pleasanton. So birthplace of the cowboy, probably, but debatable. But one thing that I know is for sure, if it's not the birthplace of the cowboy, that's at least the birthplace of a certain kind of rope called cactus ropes. And this morning, I want to think about how that we can learn a lesson for life about following Jesus from a cowboy ropes. I got to go with the founder of Cowboy Ropes, Mike Pylan. I got to go with him, and he took me on a tour through the factory that has burned down and been rebuilt, much fancier factory these days. But he was the guy who got the whole thing started, and he took me through the process of making a rope. And as we walked through that, I was just astounded time after time after time about how, wow, this is like what God does with us. As he equips us, as he works with us, as he prepares us to be a vessel of honor in the master's house or out on the master's pasture to be used by God to do his kingdom work. And I want to share with you some of the lessons that I learned there as we went through. One of the first lessons was about this thing called stress. Now, go ahead and give me the picture to that if you don't mind. There we go. Okay. And in the old days, this was a little different, but ropes are made of, well, sometimes there's 3 strands, sometimes 4, and you can even get a 5-strand rope. But these strands, each one of the 3 strands is made of other strands, and they're all twisted together, and it's kind of crazy. This is the beginning of a rope. And if you could see the various ends of this, there would be cogs. A 3-strand rope would have 3 cogs. And there would be these smaller strands of rope back and forth. And these 3 cogs would turn like this to make 3 strands, while all 3 of them would be turning like this. And as they continue to twist these strands together, eventually the rope would get shorter and shorter and shorter. This is one of the machines that it would ride on. These are metal tracks here. And Mike was telling me how it was so important for them to learn how to get the stress angle right. Because sometimes if they had too much tension on the rope, then when they got done with the rope, it was really, kind of kinky. It was, they couldn't depend on it. It would do crazy things. They had to get the stress just right, because if they didn't get enough stress on the rope, then when you take the rope out to use it, it wouldn't hold together. It didn't have any integrity. So there was this thing called strength and integrity that had to be worked out. And it struck me, it's like, it's so important. We go through life, and there's stresses that happen in life. And, we'd really like to, we think, live stress-free. But the problem with stress-free is that we never get to grow. We never become strong. One of the things that stress does is that stress builds strength in us. Muscles that are never exercised never get stronger. The old no pain, no gain. It's kind of like no pain, couch potato. Here I am standing as a, I just don't exercise enough. But stress adds strength. But even more than that, stress adds character. Let me take a different a different illustration here. Old-time master shipbuilders, when they got ready to build a ship, they could go to the forest, and for planks on the deck, just about any tree would do for them to make lumber out of those trees. Just about any tree would do. Now, when they went to select lumber for the hull and for the keel, then they had to be a little more selective. But the most important thing was when they chose the tree that would be used to fashion the main mast of the ship. They had to go up high on the mountain, above that, ordinary tree line where the forest, where the trees seem to protect one another. Had to go up and take a tall, straight tree from up high on the mountain where it had been exposed to the elements, where the tree had to weather the storms. Those trees had a grain that was tight. Those trees, having weathered the storms, having been stressed, had the strength and the integrity to become the main mast of the ship. We don't particularly care for stress. But God uses stress to shape us, to build us, to strengthen us. Now, God is the God of all comfort. Yes, he is. And we've lived enough of life to know that that's true at our house. But I want to remind us that, that God's main intent is not our comfort. God's main intent is our character. And he will comfort us in the stress. But his goal is to shape us into the image of Christ, that we would be conformed to the image of his Son. And for most of us, that takes a lot of work. I don't know about you, That takes a lot of work. And there's some stress involved in that. And so it comes to, can I trust him to know what it takes for me? You see, his purpose for me may be different than his purpose for you or for someone else. But can I trust him that he knows what I can take, and he's going to be with me in these circumstances? Can I trust him to know me better than I know myself? And trust his hand to be at work in my life. And then I guess the other thing is, can I begin to eliminate some of that unnecessary stress in my life? That stress that comes from me just overbooking life at times. That stress that is useless stress that gets added in because of crazy choices that I make. Can I practice what Scotty has been preaching about, unhurriedness, so that the stress that I need to deal with is there, and I trust God for that, but I don't unnecessarily add other stresses to it. Anyway, we went from this room where the ropes were getting all twisted up, where they were stressed, and we went to another room, a large room, and in that room, let's jump ahead to the next picture. We can do that. Yeah, we went in, and this again is the new factory. I wish you could have been. There's a bundle of ropes. It was about this big around, laid out the full length. These ropes start. The strands start at some probably 50 plus feet. They go down to just over 30 feet long. But they were laying there in this long bundle, and we stopped there and we're staring at it. I'm kind of looking at Mike and, okay, Mike, what's going on here? He says, this is where they rest. He said, we found that after we've stressed the ropes, we need to let them rest. He said, look at it. See what you see. And I looked down and I began to realize This long thing of ropes laying there on the ground almost seemed alive. It was kind of like a big snake warming itself in the hot sun on a cold morning in the fall, I guess. It was just kind of laying there, and it was twitching and kind of, moving a little bit, kind of quivery, But it was the stress that was being worked out as these ropes rested. Mike told me, he said, we found that if we take the rope straight from, the getting them all twisted up, if we take them straight into the other steps, if we skip the rest, he said they get all kinky, they get quirky, they're unreliable. Cowboy doesn't know for sure what's going to happen with that rope when he goes to throw it. Oh my goodness, rest is so important. We need to be stressed, but we also need those intervals of rest as well. Man, life will teach us that. One of the things I never knew was that leather is that way in particular. If you were to get 2 leather belts, identical, and 2 pairs of leather boots, identical, wear the first pair of boots and the first belt for as long as you could till they wore out. And then wore the other belt and the other pair of boots as long as they would last. And take that period of time, measure it, and then instead go back and wear 1 pair of boots one day and the other pair of boots the next. Wear 1 belt one day and the other belt the next day. Where you would alternate with activity and rest. The time that they would last together, alternating them, is significantly longer than twice as long of the life of 1 pair of boots or 1 belt. There is something scientifically true about the need for rest. And this is what, Scotty's been talking to us about this for a month, at how we need to learn how to rest in Jesus. So if we're going to be reliable, if we're going to be prepared for the long haul of serving Jesus, we need to have regular intervals of rest. Man, we got to listen to the rope. We got to hear its message to us. But from resting the ropes, we went to the back wall of the factory where there was this really long tray, more than 30 feet long, because you had to put a whole rope inside of it. But in the original factory, it looked more like a rain gutter. Really, looked like a rain gutter with a gas line underneath to fire up underneath, and it was filled with paraffin. And what they would do is get the fire on, and they'd melt that paraffin, and they'd drop the ropes in that trough for a hot wax bath. Yeah. And I'm staring at this hot wax bath. This is the new one. The new bath facilities are quite a bit different here. But anyway, they're dropping in. I'm thinking about 20 ropes at a time. I think he could do like 4 or 5 with the original plan. But they drop him into this wax bath, and I said, okay, Mike, what's happening here, man? He said, we have to give him this hot wax bath. We got to get him in there. Got to get the wax hot. We got to leave him in there for a while so that the wax is embedded in every fiber of the rope. And I said, so what's that for? And I was blown away when Mike said to me, that's for memory. That builds memory into the rope. It helps the rope to maintain its shape. I started to bring another rope up here, one that didn't have the wax bath. By the way, this is not a cactus rope, but thought it'd be helpful for you to get an idea of what we're talking about. But other ropes, they just, you coil them up you set them down, you come back and pick them up 5 minutes later, and they're a rat's nest. You know what I'm talking about? It's like, what happened? But for it to hold its shape, for it to remember, have that memory built in. So when the cowboy gets ready to use it, it takes the shape that he wants it to have. Oh my goodness, I thought about that, and I thought, that's it for Christians. That's where we need to be. We need, and Scotty's been preaching it, for 4 weeks. But we need a hot wax bath. We really do. We need to somehow just lay our lives in Jesus and soak him up. We need to soak up his presence. We need to soak up his word. We need to let his life, his character, somehow permeate every fiber of our being, where his life fills our life and our lives have memory, where we remember who we are in Christ, and we remember whose we are in Christ and the purpose that God has for our lives. But it was a hot wax bath, remember? And we could have asked, Mike, how hot and how long? And you know what Mike would have said? Trade secrets. Can't tell you that. How hot and how long. But man, if we could just lay our lives in Jesus, in relationship with him, linger. Thank you. Thank you for that song. Linger in him. Just be with him. Take refuge in him. And it may take a little heat. Yeah. To be really, truly infused with him, it may take a little heat. It may take more than just a little heat. But would we welcome it if we knew that he was building his own life and permeating his own life into us? Because that's what it's really all about, folks. Anyway, the last thing on the trip, last lesson that Mike introduced me to on the trip was what he referred to as freshness. Freshness, important in two ways, I understand from what Mike had to say. Ropes seem to function best when they have been crafted in the same season that the cowboy wants to use them in. Professional ropers, I am not one, but professional ropers, they make their living at this. A good roping horse may cost anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000. A fee to get into the rodeo may be $300 or $400. Entry fee to get into the rodeo. You've got to have a trailer to haul that horse. You got to feed that horse. You got to do. It's expensive stuff, and the difference between first place and fifth place is sometimes tenths of a second. And so you want the best edge you can get, and cowboys professional cowboys understand that if you want to compete well, you want a fresh rope, because the fresher the rope, the better your chances of doing well. I thought about that. But there was another issue of freshness that caught Mike and his team totally off guard. You see, on a rope, there's this loop here. Now, this loop is called a hondo. Okay, the whole thing, it fashions, a lasso. I can't even get it undone here. Forget that. don't know what I'm doing. Obviously, you knew that already. But it fashions us. But the lasso goes through this loop, goes out, goes around it, and then the rope slides down and catches the calf, the steer, whatever it is that you happen to be roping at the time. Yes, there is chicken roping, Miriam, with a different rope, by the way. Not this rope, but yeah, there is chicken roping as well. But the hondo is this loop, and to make this rope slide through here, you can hear it, right? To make it slide through really fast, you put what they call a speed burner in there. Now, nowadays, speed burners, you put it right here at this place. Speed burners these days can be plastic, which I think is just like, that's just wrong, right? Plastic on a rope. But cactus ropes have a leather speed burner here. And they would take raw leather and wrap it around here, and then on the backside, inside where it slides, it's smooth, and then on the backside they would sew that piece of leather right there to be the speed burner to help the rope slide through quickly, so you didn't miss as many feet, heads, whatever, as you're trying to rope. The speed burner that they were tying onto these ropes, they were having trouble with some of the speed burners. Now, it didn't happen so much in the wintertime, but ropes that they were making in the summertime were, in particular, they were having problems with. Mike told me, he said, it got so bad, he said trucks were going out with fresh ropes, and they were meeting trucks coming in with ropes that had failed. You know, they were meeting each other. Well, he might have been exaggerating a little bit there, but his point was that they were sending ropes out, and this little speed burner thing was failing on ropes at an incredible rate, way too much. And they couldn't figure it out. And then finally one day they realized that a raw piece of leather is in reality a raw piece of meat. And you lay a raw piece of meat out in the heat very long, and what happens? It gets rancid. It begins to rot. And what was happening was they would get there in the morning, particularly in the summertime, and they would have a pile of ropes, and they would go get a pile of leather pieces for speed burners, and they'd lay them out on their desk, and then they would, work on them, sew them up. And then lunchtime would come along, and instead of picking up, putting them back in the fridge, in the cooler, they just leave them out, and come back later after lunch in a hot Texas summer, whatever environment, and they would use those. And sometimes they get done at the end of the day, and there would be a few of those speed burners laying out on the table, and they didn't think anything about it. They just come back the next morning and pick them up the next morning. But what they were doing was they were putting rotten leather onto the hondo. They were drying in place, and then the least little pressure, the speed burner would just fall apart because they didn't stay fresh. Wow. Folks, Jesus wants us to stay fresh with him. We may have history with him, rich history, lessons learned, things done, miracles of God to bear testimony to. But if he's going to use our lives today, we can share some of that, and it's meaningful and important. But if he's going to use our lives today, I think Jesus would want us to stay fresh. with him. His Spirit, fresh, alive in us. It is so easy. It is so easy to somehow get apart from him and start to rot. The devil's out there, looking for, And we can feel ourselves drifting at times, and there's those times where we know we're just not where we need to be. But Jesus would cause us to stay fresh with him. We can't afford for our lives to rot away, where that we become useless. We need to walk in a fresh relationship with Jesus. There is in the house different kinds of vessels, some for honorable use, some for dishonorable. But if we'll cleanse ourselves from the dishonorable, 2 Timothy 2:21 says that we will be useful vessels for the master of the house. God is looking for folks who he can use as God seeks to cast his love around a lost and broken world. I don't know what to do with this, really, But God is a professional roper. I know. I was astray. And he cast his love around me one day. And he drew me to himself. And God wants to do that with the whole world. But one of the things God uses in his drawing people to himself, casting his love around the world and drawing that world to himself, is that he uses people that have trusted their life to him, who said to him, God, here's my life. I want to be that vessel of honor in the master's hand that you can use to draw a world to yourself. Oh, man. I'm willing to be one, God. Here's some takeaways. Takeaways from the lesson from the road. Would you submit your life to God's hand in the stress of life? Let him build strength and integrity into you. Would you commit to appropriate seasons of rest? It's like, man, I need to rest. And then this one, this is the one it's the great challenge for me. Would you soak up Jesus? Just lay your life in him. Soak him up to where his life is so thoroughly embedded in your life that your life takes on the shape of Jesus. Day in, day out, where God can consistently use you to draw others to himself. And finally, would you stay fresh? Cowboys of old, they herded up the cattle, pushed them on the long drives, and they ended up in the slaughterhouses at the far end of the drive. Wow. Not a pretty story. But God's up to something different. You see, God sees a world of strays that are on their way to slaughter. And he wants to rope them and draw them back to himself and settle them in his lush green pastures. That's what God's up to. But he needs a rope. would you be one?